All right. How's everybody doing tonight? All good? Making it through? It's Monday, right? Can't be that good, but it also can't be that bad because it's almost over. Okay, so I'm looking at Moodle right now. And if I remember correctly, I stuck to the schedule last week and focused on the relationship between verbal behavior, and VBDA. I think we did a good job sticking to that motif. So that actually leaves us in a great spot for this week to focus on condition reinforcement, which is one of my favorite topics when it comes to this class, because I think it starts to pull us in a bit of a different direction than we are typically used to thinking of when we think about verbal behavior. So I'm looking forward to seeing where your guys' thoughts lie and where we get to by the end of the night. Hello to those who just joined us. I think there's probably going to be a few more coming along as well. But before we start on verbal behavior, I wanted to check in and have a conversation around our mentees, mentoring, and kind of how everything is starting up there. I know we just started. No worries, Maddie. We just got started. So I know that I've already heard from a few of you about some mentees who already seem, no one is wanting to call it late yet, but have not been in touch with you guys in the way that you would have expected, especially considering the first week's worth of assignments have been due. And I wanted to, I got multiple individual emails about this issue, and I kind of deflected them to this class because I think it's important that we all talk about this together because while some of you, I'm hoping, I haven't heard from everybody, so I'm hoping that some of you have gotten off to a good start with your mentor or mentees. Everyone's going to have a struggle at some point in terms of getting that information from them. So let's kind of talk. So the question on the table is how to work with a mentee, I don't want to even say work with, I want to say how to communicate with a mentee who has effectively missed a deadline, who has not gotten their work in on time. How do we work with those who we are overseeing to encourage, really simultaneously encourage and discourage, right? Like, hey, I'm here, I'm available, get your stuff in, don't be consistently late. What is the balance? Like, how does that work? How do you guys feel about that process? How do you feel about the language you would use? Right from the jump, we're kind of able to zero in on like the most challenging part of the mentor-mentee relationship. So opening up to you guys, what are your thoughts? How do you communicate with a mentee, in any capacity, who has missed a deadline? What's your guys' thoughts?
I can talk for a little bit.
Go ahead.
I always like to think of it as like me being a supervisor of pretty much a BCBA, and you have to get here at one point, gotta get there at one point. But I always told her, like, because I'm available for Zoom. If she needs me for Zoom, let me know. We're Zooming. But she's always sent in her stuff like on time to me, and I get her back within like 1 or 2 days, depending on what I got going through. But I always have to think about how a supervisor would approach it. Like, how would my supervisor come up to me and ask me like what's going on in my like personal life or stuff like that? But
Good. So there are a couple of things that you hit on there, and one is I like that you're already thinking about it in terms of what do my mentors do that I want to emulate. So you guys all have mentors in your life, whether it's us as your professors, whether it's your supervising BCBAs, whether it's someone else that you've worked with in a professional capacity. You've all been spoken to as a mentee, and I'm positive that every one of you can identify interactions that have been particularly helpful and interactions that have been particularly unhelpful. And from the mentee's perspective, for those unhelpful ones, uh, what's challenging about those might be the interactions that might be helpful for someone else, but were just unhelpful for you. Those might be the interactions that were unhelpful for you because you hated them and they were annoying, but got the job done and might have been the right thing to do. So, Courtney, when you're talking about like thinking about how your mentors have worked with you, I love that. I want that. That's your instructional history right now, and that's what you guys should be drawing on. The second thing is, it sounds like the way I interpret what you said in terms of availability and getting back to your mentee, you're setting expectations right from the start. Not your expectations of them necessarily, but what they should expect of you. And that's modeling what they should be doing, what you should expect of them. So hypocrisy is the term that comes to mind. And how are you going to hold someone accountable if you in the mentor position are not holding yourself accountable? I know for myself, and I think that this anecdote that I'm about to give is an important concept to understand. I don't think it comes to a surprise to any of you that I am not great at getting assignments graded and back to you guys in a particularly timely manner. That is a flaw of mine. I am always working on it. I am at times improving and at times getting worse, and so on and so forth. But I have always been very flexible with you guys, particularly when I know I'm behind, right? And you guys have, and I've set that expectation, right? And you guys all know that. You also know that I always get it all graded. I always get you guys what you need. And over time, you've learned that means the expectation is I got to get my stuff in by that eventual due date, right? Now, I'm not advocating that you guys have that kind of lax policy for your mentees, but that idea of modeling your expectations and only expecting to get what you are able to give. And Courtney, what I think doing both by saying I'm available by Zoom and by getting back to your mentee in a very quick turnaround, you've set that expectation that they can have of you, and that gives you the flexibility, not the flexibility, but the authority to say, and I expect the same in return, right? It wouldn't be very fair if I was hyper strict with you guys with deadlines, but then I didn't do anything about it, right? If the deadline should be so that I can get going with grading, right? And it's kind of the same thing for you. So don't put yourself in a situation where you are saying it has to be in by this day and time, an hour, but then you don't do anything with it for 5 or 6 or 7 days, right? Have that deadline, have those those relatively artificial deadlines be functional. All right, good. What else? And I'll broaden the question a little bit. If you don't or can't or don't know how to respond to the initial question, to just how are your first interactions going with your mentees?
I try to approach mentoring the same way that I was taught by my mentor, my initial mentor, to fill out a TPRA. So anytime I try to give feedback, like I know I'm a nitpicky person, I like about my own work, that's who I am. So, but I have been trying to identify something that needs work, and then I try to identify at least two things that I think they did a good job at, and provide that positive reinforcement, because I don't want every interaction with me to be aversive for them. Like, oh, my mentor nitpicks my stuff. Like I know I don't want to send my stuff to her because she gives me bad feedback. So like I'm trying to be reasonable, but then also like when I'm giving feedback, also giving positive reinforcement as well.
Good. Did you say that you're actually filling out a TPRA form, or did you say like a TPRA? Like you're treating it like a TPRA?
Like that's the way I was taught to fill out a TPRA whenever you're
Okay,
training a line technician. If you're going to say that their corrections are not, they're not following through with corrections, you should say like, I love how you're providing reinforcement for to the client for sitting, or
Yeah.
whatever it is that they're doing appropriately.
Awesome, awesome. And yeah, that it's an old teacher trick, the sandwich technique, right? Two positives and a negative. And I absolutely think there's value to it, and especially from the start. And once you establish that rapport, you get to the point where it's like, just cut through the BS. Tell me the things that I need to work on. Like you have the confidence, you have the um, you get to a point where you know what you're doing well, and you're just looking for feedback and advice, right? And that's a great place to get to, because when you talk about the I had something good. When you talk about the reinforcement of the mentor mentee relationship, and you get to a point where you are just asking for that feedback, that means that the relationship itself is reinforcing, and you don't no longer need to condition anything, right? You don't need to condition yourself as a reinforcer. You can just being there and having that interaction is reinforcing, and the mentee is seeking that truly functional feedback. Because if you think about it, at this level, the reinforcement that we are providing in most cases is not related to learning. The reinforcement that we're providing is related to the performance behaviors that we are already emitting, right? Especially right now. Down the line in this relationship, we're going to be giving some consistent feedback and corrections. And then, when we switch for a specific behavior from correction to reinforcer, that's our learn unit, right? That's where learning is occurring. But once you reinforce that behavior with advanced repertoires, now it should be a performance behavior and an expectation, right? So most of the reinforcement that we are providing is for performance behaviors. It's very few of instances of the feedback that we give are the reinforcing feedback that we give are for learning behaviors. So we are conditioning. That is what's happening, and I think that is an important piece to see. Don't feel that you have to reinforce every single appropriate behavior that you see, because especially over time, because most of those behaviors are performance, and you want to make sure that schedule is thinned appropriately, so when you do provide reinforcement for that learning behavior, it's really powerful. and really meaningful. You know, how many of you have gotten, you know, you write on a research summary, let's say, you know, take those last couple questions in particular, and you've put a few lines, you've gotten, you know, I want to see more here. You put a few more sentences, I want to see more here. And then you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm really going to think this through. And you write like a nice solid paragraph. And it's really meaningful. And either myself or Dr. G comes right back and says, awesome job. This really hit the nail on the head. And that's that much more reinforcing because you behaved in a new way, right? If I've been saying, great job, great job, great job, then you put 10 times more effort and you just got great job, it doesn't do it. It's not meaningful, right? And I apologize if that's what you did one time and that's what I did. But I really think about providing feedback in the same context as how you provide instruction and learning units to your clients and to your students. We don't provide praise for every single performance behavior in particular, right? We save that for the really important, really meaningful learning opportunities. Good, good. What else?
I think one of the things that I've been doing is kind of just setting like what my expectations are with my mentee, and kind of trying to model the things that I'm doing in the school system. So like my parents, some of my parents, they receive the progress of our children, like how their children are doing via progress reports. And one of the things that I like to do, especially at the very beginning of the semester, I wrote out a document where it says, these are the way that you will receive information on how your student is doing. Progress reports, you will receive a call from me once a month to just kind of update you on how your child is doing. And you can always communicate with me. You know, you always can call the school to get in contact with me. This is my email. You can always contact me in this way. And I think it's also important to have those kind of that outline for our mentees, because it kind of, they realize what the expectations are. And so you kind of set yourself, so you set them up for success, especially if you have a mentee or a parent who's constantly is like a helicopter, you know, who's constantly wanting to know how their student is doing, or the mentee wants to know how they are doing. This is a good way to kind of establish that and set them up for success. So
good. And the way you're talking about expectations and is a little bit different, I think, than even the way that Courtney was talking about expectations. And I think there are multiple ways to look at it. So one of the ways that you're talking about expectations here really is with boundaries, right? You're saying that I'm doing plenty to make myself available and be communicative, but don't take advantage of that, almost, right? Like, don't be calling at all hours of the night. Here are the ways that you can get in touch with me. Here are the ways that I will respond to you. Here are the ways that I will reach out and be available, but like, put the box on it. And for those of you in the school setting, that's like super important. That is really, really important, because you will have those helicopter parents that will want to, you know, you are their concierge, you are the help desk, right? And if you don't answer your email or answer your phone at all hours of the night on weekends, they get really upset. But if you set those expectations and those boundaries and you stick to them and you're contingent, I think that that's a really, really important thing to do. The other expectation that we haven't spoken about, so you know, Courtney's expectations in terms of modeling types of behaviors. You have Isaac's expectations in terms of communication and boundaries. But there's also expectations in terms of a product, right? The actual expectation that you have in terms of the behaviors that you're giving feedback on, right? And I think that this is a really, and I haven't looked at this in this way for this class yet, but not everyone comes to the table with the same skill set, correct? Not just kids, but adults. And the finish line is still the same, right? There is still a standard for a research summary. There's still a standard for data collection. There's still a standard for a DTS quiz. There's still a standard for what it takes to become a BCBA or an RBT or an RLT, like whatever your level is. And the job of a mentor is to get someone from where they are to where they need to be, not from where the mentor wants them to be to where the mentee wants to be, right? That is a much, that range is a lot different than the first range. Setting behavior expectations should not be done until you have some baseline, until you see where your mentees are, what type of support they need. And at that point, just like with our kids, do you make a plan on how to get there? Don't raise hands, but some of you are going to get mentee work and be, let me put it this way. Most of you are going to be surprised when you get your mentee work. What side of the spectrum that surprise falls on is going to be very different. Some people are going to be pleasantly surprised. Some people are going to be, a little disappointed and kind of like, I was expecting maybe something more here, and that's okay. Very few of you are going to have the Goldilocks, like, yeah, that's basically what I was expecting, right? And it's important that you not have in your head a plan of like, all right, week 1 we're going to work on this, and week 2 we're going to work on this, and week 3 we're going to work on this. It's very important to meet your mentees where they are, and then identify from there what we're going to work on week after week after week to get them where they need to be. All right. Cool. So let's try and get an answer to, or a thought or two, I should say, on how to actually communicate with our mentees when it comes to especially these initial assignments, but timeliness. And like, I know I've already bumped you once. I don't really want to be pushy, but I also want to support you and don't want you to get behind. How do we communicate that? How do we walk that line? And there's no right or wrong answer. Don't, I'm not fishing for anything, I promise.
I like to put everything in writing. So like I can refer back. I do, I'm kind of like a supervisor for LRCE. Over the summers, it's like an alternative certification for teachers. And so we have about like 50 mentees in the program. So it gets like, and we kind of separate it, like I usually do elementary. So it can get very like tedious going through all of the assignments that are due and stuff like that and giving feedback. So referencing like a previous email in like a not scary way really helps sometimes. So like laying, like I think Vincent was, or no, Isaac was saying about setting the expectations clearly, like these are my availability times or whatever at the very beginning, and then referring back to that. Like with my mentees this, or the first week, I said, so on Sundays, I'd really love to have your research summary and quiz so I can knock it out and get it back to you and you can recycle it. And then keep referring back to that. So like if they're late by like a week, just popping in on a Monday and being like, hey, just checking to see if you need any help or feedback. If you're going to get the research summary in soon, let me know.
Good. It made me think of something which I'm going to end up addressing a lot in this class that I hadn't addressed before. One, because it's only the second time I taught this class, but two, I didn't spend as much time on the mentoring side of things last year as I want to this year. How many of you would rate yourself an 8 or above on a made up scale in terms of your written communication with others? Okay, so about 50-50, right? For those of you who didn't raise your hand, don't feel bad in any way, shape, or form. How many of you have miscommunicated via text? How many of you have miscommunicated via email? How many of you have written an email, gotten a response you didn't expect, read back through your email, and been like, what the hell? That was totally fine. How many of you have done the exact same thing, read your email, and been like, I said that the wrong way? Right? We are writing to express vocal communication more and more and more. And while we are getting used to it, there's so much nuance and so much subtlety, especially when you're working in corrections and in these highly stressful, high impact relationships, that every little thing you do has the chance to be misinterpreted or communicated the wrong way. Laura, what jogged my memory on this, or thought process on this, was when you said you like to get everything in writing so that you can reference those emails. How many of you have received a forwarded email from the person that sent the original email to you with that original email in the text, and your thought process, yeah, I know, you didn't have to resend it again? Like, you see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? There's that referencing that email or quoting someone else's words, or it seems like it seems like you're shoring up your position, but it also puts that person in a black and white position of effectively being wrong. Right? Per my last email. Yeah, exactly, Maddie. And that puts the people in defensive positions right from the start. Now, there are situations where that is necessary, but in many ways, or there are ways to mitigate that. All right. So, Laura, what is something, and this, I'm asking Laura, but for everybody, what is something, because you're not wrong, right? You have to be able to reference things that have been said before. So how, when it comes to follow-up emails in particular, because that's effectively what we're talking about, what might be some ways that you can allow for follow-up emails without creating this dynamic of I'm right and you're wrong, you're late, get your stuff in, but still ask that? I have one thing in my mind. It's definitely not the only way, but I haven't thought of anything else yet. So what do you guys think? What are some ways that we might be able to achieve that same goal?
I I know sometimes you can say like, or I've said this and I've had people say this to me like, hey, I don't know if you saw my last text or saw my last email, because like I'm totally guilty of this. Anyone who works with me is going to laugh because I do this all the time where I'll like read an email or a text and I'll respond and I'm like, yes, this is what I'm going to say. But then I don't immediately do it. So then whenever they're like, hey, I don't know if you saw it, I'm like, yes. And I replied in my head, but not in real life. Like, so you can just kind of ask like, hey, did you see that? Like, that happened a lot to me.
So that's good because that like that softens the correction, right? It's like I know I sent this. I really just want to make sure that you actually saw it, right? When you send the forwarded email, it's like, I know you saw it, so now respond to it, right? And if you didn't see it, I'm putting it right here that it got to you, you know? So okay, so that's one way. Good. Clarissa, go ahead.
Something that I have experience with, I guess, is to have the person like create their own deadline. Like, when do you think you could have this by? Or what is a deadline that we can set for blah, blah, blah? Because it kind of takes off the pressure and puts it back on the other person, not to pressure, but to be like, I'm going to help you get there. But I want to know where we're at.
Good. So giving them ownership over their own behavior. I love that. That's a really great way. And then from your perspective, it's like, I'm not holding you to my contingency. I'm holding you to your contingency. I'm just here for accountability purposes, right? Good. I like that a lot. What
And
else?
I think, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead, Courtney. Yeah.
I think the only thing that not necessarily that I'm struggling, but like I don't know like when things are on their side when they're due. So like there's like DTS quizzes. I'm not too sure if those are due every week. And I mean, research summaries, you probably have one every week, but I don't know that that's for sure. So when we're Zooming or emailing, because we do back and forth, I'd say, hey, what's due this week on your side that you can send me? That's how.
Yeah, and caveat to that, I am going to post the schedule, but don't worry about that. I think that is more what you're talking about, Courtney, is that's the bigger picture, right? Like that's more important than you guys having the schedule, is finding a way to communicate what that schedule is and when you, the mentor, should expect things, right? Good. The way that I was thinking was to build in the correction as part of your expectation, right? So at the outset, say, I'm going to email you every week at this time, just regardless of what you've sent in, just to check in. Hey, do you have anything that's coming this week? When can I expect things? Right? So it's now it's not behavior dependent. It's just a ratio schedule, or sorry, an interval schedule instead of a ratio schedule, right? So just every week, I'm going to email you. Doesn't matter if we just spoke or if we have a meeting scheduled. I'm going to email you same time every week. Tell me what's going on this week. What's the expectation? When am I going to expect something from you this week? So kind of combining what I'm saying with what Clarissa was saying. The other way, if you do have a schedule, you just say, hey, I have your schedule. I know when things are due, whether it's because you told me or otherwise. If I don't hear from you 24 hours after you said it's going to be in, that's when I'm going to email you, right? So on the front end, if you build in what that corrective process is going to look like, that takes the onus off of you and puts it onto that expectation. All right. Think of it. I'm going to try and bring these back to Learn Units as often as possible. Part of your contract with a learner, whether it's client or student, as a teacher or line tech, is that you will give corrections immediately following a behavior, or yep, still there? Okay, good. or 3 seconds with no response, right? That's our standard correction procedure. If you wait more than 3 seconds, or you don't give that feedback immediately after the behavior, if the learner has the prerequisites, they're going to start looking at you like, they do it? Was that it? What comes next? Right? But when we have the standard of immediate feedback or 3 seconds of no response and then feedback, that makes this predictable correction. If we had that on a variable schedule, that would be very challenging and very punishing to our learners. When we have it on that predictable schedule, it makes it okay. I know I'm going to get feedback. I know I'm going to get this piece of feedback at X time after a behavior or an absence of behavior. And that's built in on the front end. You guys can do the same thing with your mentees. All right. Sorry, you guys are jumping around. Am I freezing on you guys every couple of seconds? No? No? Okay, good. All right. So does that help? What I would do if you're any one of these ideas I think is good. If you're already in a situation out to your and either have not or are needed. I think any one of these ideas are need to be. But think what's the best one relative to the type of conversation, the type of interaction you've already had with them. All right? Sound good? Cool. Any other mentor-mentee related questions right now? Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I have one. I'm full of questions today. I told you I would be. So my mentees that I have just one mentee for 2 classes, but she's only been sending me for 547, and I noticed on Moodle you just have 547. I think we talked about it last week. Like, am I still mentoring her?
I just
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So yes, you're still mentoring her for both classes. I still need to put up the 534, 39 slots. But you only have to turn in one, but you're still mentoring for both. You only have to turn in, you're only going to get graded for either 547 or 539. You're not going to get graded for both because then there'd be a massively unequal amount of points. So that should be okay for you. But she should still be sending you the 539 info as well. And that is a new process. So I would go ahead and just prompt like, hey, just quick reminder, I am also your mentor for this class. So, okay.
So if we have 2 mentees, excuse me, like I have one mentee for 2 classes and then another mentee for a 3rd class.
Yeah.
So am I sending in, like for my first mentee, I'm sending in either practicum or ABA. For my second mentee, I'm sending in all of that stuff, or am I just mentoring without turning in?
Your grade is just on the one section for one candidate.
Okay, like, that's what I didn't know. If you had multiple, like how that changed. Okay.
No. If you want feedback on some of your mentoring, then especially if you're unsure of something, email that to me and I can take a look over. Okay. Sound good? All right.
Yes.
Cool. Any other mentor-mentee questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry. I just asked a question.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead, Matt. Yep.
Okay. So I haven't had this happen yet, but I've been anticipating it and I'm like nervous about it. So I always tease you and Dr. Gotro that like, I just forget y'all are human. Like I can't imagine y'all making a mistake ever. But like, have you ever had that happen where something you make mistakes with, someone else does and like you just like are not sure how to like provide them with the proper feedback, if that makes sense.
Yeah, say it one more time just because you cut out
Like,
for a split second. I want to make sure I answer the
so like
question.
if
Right.
there's some like for instance, like I overwrite. Like I tend to be a little lengthy when I write something rather than too short. But I haven't had this problem yet, but I'm waiting for my mentee to submit something that you may think is too long and too detailed. And I miss that cue because to me it looks fine. Like I don't want to not like I don't want to steer them in the wrong direction because I struggle with that. Like that's not fair to them. So like
Mhm.
how do you like not like if in your experience if there's something that you know you're aware that you struggle with, like how do you provide someone with feedback and not influence their mentors
So,
their mentorship?
so I don't think you are yet in a position where that's something you need to worry about. Um, Part of mentoring is identifying what defines quality for you. What the challenge for you guys is you're kind of like throwing a dart at a curve and trying to figure out like where on that curve they're supposed to be. But given where they're supposed to be, or where by the end of the semester, however you see fit for them to get there is appropriate. I'm not expecting that every single one of your mentees is going to turn in the same product at the end of the semester. Very much a product of who mentors you, right? Over time, who your mentors, you are your mentors. And it's not a bad thing by any stretch. Now, if you mentor, for example, let's say you tell your mentee to add in all this stuff into, say, an abstract on a research summary, and I come back and say, I don't think you need this and this. Trust me right away. Well, number one, I'm going to see your feedback on your mentee's work. So what I would say in that situation, I have done this plenty of times, is this is what I think. I'm altering your mentor's feedback right now. This is how I think you need to respond to this in the future, and I will reach out to your mentor and kind of guide them appropriately. That's how I've done that in the past. But believe me, in the past, when I give a correction that they were corrected on from their mentor, I hear about it right away. My mentor told me to. They're very quick to. Well, you guys at one point were very quick to blame it on your mentors, and that's totally fine. That's totally fine. That's they understand that you guys are learning how to give that feedback. It is learn units all around. But I don't want you. My expectation for you is to try and come to an understanding of where they're supposed to be and give feedback based on that.
Okay. What I've been trying to do is just tread really lightly when asking them to write more because I don't want to give like too much of advice on that. But then I also try to think like, what does Dr. Shaman say he wants more of? So I'm like, okay, make sure for your social significance that needs to be like you need to give detail on that, or just the sections you've always told us need to have. Like you will take off if it's not answered appropriately. So I've been trying to like take what you have said and kind of pass that along without telling them to add a ton because I don't want them to have my bad habits. Like I want them to,
Yeah.
to
and
develop those
totally blame it on your guys' instructional history with us. Like you know what we want to see. And you can totally veil it and like Dr. Shaman looks for these 4 things. That's totally appropriate. That's totally appropriate. And Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
No, I think that that's an appropriate approach for
Okay.
sure. Okay, great. All right, let's switch gears. Let's make sure that we have at least some talk of verbal behavior tonight. So I've gotten a few emails from you guys and set up a couple of meetings about research projects, and we're definitely headed in the right direction there. So I feel really good about where those are going. Just to and tonight's conversation will help clarify this a little bit. But overall, if you're still looking for a research project, what I want you to be thinking of is not just does this project kind of tangentially involve verbal behavior, because all projects in some way, shape, or form involve verbal behavior, but is this going to make a significant difference via verbal behavior, either as a dependent or an independent variable? So some verbal behavior component should be either a primary, should be a primary aspect of either your dependent or independent variable. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, good. And don't really worry about due dates for your paper for this class. I want to be able to keep you moving along, but I recognize things happen very, very quickly. Like, I think your review part 1 is due this week. Don't, like, if you're not ready for that, then don't turn it in. When you're ready, turn it in, but you know, don't push it off too far. Okay. Condition reinforcement. This is the whole thing. Condition reinforcement is the picture when it comes to verbal behavior development theory and the application of from an intervention perspective of verbal behavior. As over, once we come back from Mardi Gras, as we go over each of the pies, we're going to be talking a ton about what changes as a result of that group of cusper capabilities being induced. And that is 100% tied to what are our new reinforcers, right? How do we contact new reinforcers? How do we acquire new condition reinforcers? How do we learn new things because of these new reinforcers, or learn new ways because of these new reinforcers? The challenging thing about verbal behavior, and this has taken me years to fully wrap my mind around, and I'm still working on it, and I still get caught in the same kind of vocal traps. But when we talk about like listener behaviors, right? We talk about listener behaviors the way we talk about like any behavior, right? And yes, to some degree that's true, because the group of behaviors that are listener behaviors are operant. They are, you know, there are clear antecedents, there are clear reinforcers and consequences for emitting those behaviors that select the behavior in the future, yada, yada, yada. But what we are really talking about is conditioned reinforcement for emitting listener responses. When we talk about speaker behavior, we're talking about conditioned reinforcement for emitting speaker responses. What is listener behavior? Give me 4 examples of listener behavior. Someone give me 1 example.
Textually responding.
Textually responding. It's a listener behavior.
Listener responding.
Like what? Like the actual behavior. What's the actual behavior? You're thinking too hard.
It'd be like instruction following,
Yeah, following an instruction. Perfect.
complying.
Good. What's like your most basic listener behavior you can think of?
Imitation.
No. Oh, you're back. You're not. All right. Say that again.
The first one in the L car is making eye contact when told to do so. Like look at me. and
Okay.
make eye
So
contact.
responding to name or look at me. So
Right.
yeah.
Responding to
Okay.
name,
Good.
eyes open.
So orienting, right, is a listener behavior. Okay. Even simpler. If you're putting in a listener program, what's your antecedent? That's not just direction following. What, Christine?
Target.
What?
Point to target.
Point two. Point two. That is the behavior, right? Now, how many of you have clients that you would not necessarily categorize as listeners, but can emit a point two response? Has anyone had that before? Yeah, right? So there is a difference between emitting listener behavior and being a listener. What is that difference?
The stimulus control?
No,
Like- No. Okay.
no.
I had 2 strikeouts.
That's how they're
I don't know if I
similar.
want to answer another one.
That was a strong no. Sorry. No, but that's how they're similar. They are both under the same stimulus control. But a listener behavior only really needs to be under that stimulus control. That individual listener response. Listener behavior as a whole is governed by conditioned reinforcement for listening.
Okay, so with advanced
You see what I'm
listener
saying?
literacy, you provide a visual distractor because we want to determine if the stimulus control for listening is auditory or visual, right? So like
Yes.
point to like is I don't know. I got confused because I thought that was like when you have listener literacy, you're listening, you're not looking for like visual cues.
Yes. That is absolutely correct. However, advanced listener literacy is effectively the like end dependent variable, right? We want do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
That's very different. That is ensuring that you have not conflated something lower. Listener literacy is the induction of the capability. Cost of capability, that one's up in the air. I think capability, right? Listener literacy is where responding as a listener is conditioned. That's where you get the new behavior. All right. When we talk about all of these custom capabilities, all of these verbal behavior repertoires, I don't want to say this without and be wrong, but do any of them, I'm still thinking, involve token reinforcement?
If it's dependent on generalized reinforcement contingencies, then it's not actually a condition, like a natural condition reinforcer, right? Like if
Right.
you need to provide a token, then it's not a natural reinforcer.
Exactly. And when you go through those protocols, when you go through the assessments for those custom capabilities, do any of them rely on tokens, on edibles, with the exception of speaker immersion, where they man for whatever the heck they want, right? But do any of them rely on specific individualized prosthetic reinforcers? I don't think so. I know them pretty well.
No, but
Every
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Maddie.
I have a question. Like I haven't worked with littles in a really long time, but like beginning cusps. But like I know for faces, like we're conditioning the face, obviously, and a lot of people when they conduct faces, they provide edible reinforcement, like in combination with verbal praise, with natural reinforcement. Is that wrong?
Okay.
That's the intervention. The
Not
test.
the probe. That you're right. You're right. You provide like crushed
But
goldfish
still,
or whatever. Okay.
but still, you guys tell me. And we're going to get to the week after Mardi Gras. We're going to get to the pre-verbal stuff, so we'll be able to talk about this in much more detail. But if let's assume, and this is a big assumption, especially with faces, let's assume that whoever's doing it is doing it correctly. All right, that is a big assumption with that one, and that they are providing edible reinforcement after a correct response. In what way, and there is a way, there is a correct answer to this. In what way is that edible correct for specifically for face conditioning?
Because you're pairing?
What kind of pairing?
Stimulus.
No, not if they're providing it after. All the other stuff is your stimulus.
Stimulus response.
No, same.
But it's not stimulus, but it's not stimulus response.
It's operant. It's stimulus response, but it's operant, right? You're providing it afterwards, so it's correct to the degree that operant reinforcer is serving as a conditioning agent, an operant conditioning agent. Does that make sense to everybody? The way I just said that? Anyone want clarification? Say it's fine if you do. I'll say it again anyway. You have, Rianne's like, yep. So you, and I just had this conversation today, so I'm totally primed for this. Courtney, I don't know if you heard us talking about this in the background. You have two types of conditioning. You have respondent conditioning, which is stimulus, and you have operant stimulus response, right? But with operant reinforcement, you can either be conditioning or you could be working in pre-mac, right? They're not necessarily both operating. One way to tell which one is operating has to do with the value of the stimulus that you're or response that you are conditioning. If that stimulus is neutral, then you are doing a conditioning procedure. If that stimulus already has a value, then you are more likely in the pre-mac realm. Okay. How many of you will emit certain behaviors for a reinforcer, and that set of behaviors never gets conditioned? Right? There are things about my job that I will never enjoy doing. Grading sucks. I hate it. Right? There's a reinforcer every 2 weeks. And yes, pay schedules are a problem, and we don't need to get into that so specifically. But not every behavior that is followed by a reinforcer is going to be conditioned as a reinforcer in and of itself. Okay? And that's okay. But we have to recognize the role that that reinforcer is playing. So, and this gets at the crux of what I'm really talking about through this whole thing. None of those protocols operate under Premack's principle of positive reinforcement. They all operate, especially when there's edibles or generalized reinforcers, they all operate, or are supposed to operate, under a conditioning, an operant conditioning, no, sorry, when those are involved, they are supposed to be operating under an operant conditioning principle. Okay? Every single one of those protocols conditions new natural reinforcers. Why is that so important when it comes to verbal behavior?
Because in the real
Why
world,
is
you're
that
not-
the key
sorry.
to this whole thing? Say it again, Rian? No, sorry, go ahead.
Because in the natural world, you're not going to be given edibles for saying hi to someone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Generalized reinforcers and prosthetic reinforcers do not govern our social contract. Verbal behavior.
You may want to receive an edible for saying hi to someone, but you're just not going to.
And yes, correct. Absolutely correct. There are cases in real life where that effectively does happen. Right? You go to an interaction because of edible reinforcement. Someone you don't particularly like offers to take you out to a nice lunch. Okay, sure, I'll go. I'm not going for you. I'm going because it's a nice meal, right? But that's not verbal. That's not verbal. You see that? I know you guys do. So every single protocol, every single repertoire, every single set of behaviors that we are talking about this for the rest of this semester are going to be spoken about in the context of new conditioned reinforcers. Every single instance of verbal behavior that you guys address, whether it's in this class, whether it's in your clinics, whether it's in your classrooms, wherever it is going forward, I want you from this day to always be, to get in the habit of thinking, how am I addressing the conditioned reinforcers that are necessary for this behavior or set of behaviors or repertoire to emerge? When it comes to the protocols themselves, and this has been an extremely challenging thing for me to kind of disseminate conceptually. I think that this idea of conditioning and the role that conditioned reinforcement plays is so important because it gets lost. What are the protocols? At their core, There's no way for you guys to not overthink this question. I don't want you to think hard about it. But what are the protocols? They are a set of
Tactics.
tactics. Thank you. Awesome. I got there. Awesome, Maddie.
Okay.
No.
Wrong. I was very scared to say that.
No, that's absolutely right. They are a set of tactics. Okay. You guys know how I harp on this. Tactics are a topography, or a topographical way of addressing a principle. Correct? Okay. That means that you can change the topography. You can change what it looks like as long as the principle stays constant, stays the same. So the principle that we are working with here is there's a condition reinforcement principle. There's a verbal behavior idea principle. I don't know if you want to call that a principle yet, but as long as you are staying in the realm of conditioning new verbal reinforcers or natural reinforcers for verbal behavior, the topography of the, bless you, Cordy, of the protocol can change. Now, why is that so challenging? Because we don't have hundreds of verbal behavior protocol tactics written up. We have like 12. And not all of them are written particularly well, right? How many of you have tried to run the social listener reinforcement games before? Anyone tried to run that?
I've laid out the protocol for a client right before they transitioned to a school. So I made all of my materials. I was ready to go, and I was using it based on the dissertation, and it was very confusing. Like,
okay.
I'm kind of glad when they transition out. I was like, okay, maybe I wasn't ready to do that yet, because I didn't feel prepared.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't feel like I was going to do it correctly because it was very complex.
And the article is even less clear than the dissertation. All right. And that's the only one we have. I think there might be one more now, but it's a very complex, convoluted procedure. And what's lost in it is that the specifics of each game not only don't matter, but necessarily we're back. Okay, good. So mid thought, let's see if I can get it back. It's not that, or so the topography doesn't matter, but it necessarily needs to change based on what the individuals are capable of and are interested in, right? The first time that was made clear to me. So the first game, and go look up the protocol when you can. It is a really good protocol. Is an I Spy game, right? And it's supposed to condition working with a peer and condition the Yo contingency game board, and it's very much it's almost unimportant to the overall package, but it's it's the first thing you read, and it seems like it's this really procedurally important thing to do. So I done it before. I felt really good about it. I went into my next year, and I was going from a K-2 self-contained class to a third grade inclusion class. And we sat down to, the day of or day before we were going to start this protocol. And my mentor brought out this like game of the human body. And I looked at it like, what the heck is that? And she said, oh, that's what we're going to use for I Spy. I'm like, but you just like hold up the words and they talk and then they move up. And she's like, it's not appropriate for typical third graders. And right there, I stopped and I said, wait, let me think about this. And as I realized, I'm like, what matters here is reinforcing the interaction, not what you do to get the interaction, but that this interaction occurs and it is reinforced. And that was my aha moment. And that opened up all the protocols. How many of you have run observational learning before? 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 of you. I will bet that you have all done it a different way. And I will bet that each one of you think that your way is close to correct. And none of you are right, none of you are wrong. Right? What matters is what are the set of behaviors that you are reinforcing such that you can condition, and observational learning is a different one, such that you can condition the establishing operation. Observational learning is not about condition reinforcers. That's about a condition to Yo. That's a really big one. And we won't even get started on naming tonight, whatever the hell that is, right? All of these are about conditioning reinforcers, MOs, EOs, whatever it's going to be. But it's about conditioning new reinforcers such that these new wide array of behaviors can be emitted under the appropriate contingencies. Every single one of them is a generalized repertoire. When we induce listener behavior, we don't care if you can answer those or respond to those 20 questions in 40 seconds. We want you to respond to any listener response in a short amount of time, reliably. The only way that you can do that is if listening and responding to that antecedent in a way that fits into our social contract is a reinforcer. You guys get all that? That all makes sense? Any questions? All right. So we have 2 weeks until we meet again. I want you guys, I'm going to give you a little assignment. I don't know exactly what, how I want to word it just yet. So I'll send you assignment. I want you to bring information for discussion point for 2 weeks from now. So I'll email you guys the specifics of what I want, but I want you to start looking at the protocols either that are currently being implemented around you. Some of you don't have people around you implementing lots of things. So it can also be protocols that you've implemented in the past. And I want you to start thinking about and try not to anticipate my response. That's not what I want. That's not what I'm looking for here. I want you to think of what your understanding of the reinforcers for, I think cusp and capabilities are the right way to go. I don't think protocols is the right way to go. So looking at the verbal behavior pie, or pies, I want you, pick a couple that are going on around you, or that you've done in the past, and I want you to identify what your understanding is or was of what the reinforcers are for that repertoire. Okay? That sound good? Okay. Let's see. I am going to go on a grading spree, and get all your guys' stuff graded, hopefully by the end of the week. That's my goal. The literature review, I would love some of you to be able to post those if you're not in a place where it's ready for consumption. That's fine, but I'd like you guys to start posting things that you have, even if you don't turn it in yet, so that you guys can start to read through, give each other feedback, and have a little bit of a conversation around your ideas, your thoughts, where things are going, but before you actually turn those lit reviews in. Everything else is, pretty straightforward. So when we come back in 2 weeks, we are going to be talking exclusively about the pre-verbal foundational custom capabilities. We're going to focus on condition reinforcement. We bring questions about procedure. If there's anything that you want to talk about, we're going to start to talk about how those custom capabilities interact with each other and prepare an individual to be built upon. So we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty of the specifics, and that will kind of be the format going forward. I want to, let's see, in 2 weeks when we come back, let's try. Well, I'm teaching 5:01, so I'll make sure I end at 6:30, and we'll get here. We'll start here at like 6:35, so that I can give us a little bit more time for, or an appropriate amount of time for mentoring, and give us more time to talk about VB. Okay, so if you are in 5:01, I will end right at 6:30. And give us a couple minutes to transition over. If you are not in 5:01, 6:35 will be our starting point. Okay. And for those who would like to set up some one-on-one discussions about your research, go ahead and shoot me an email. Happy to do that. And unfortunately, I'm not in a place where I can do this Wednesday, but I would like to plan on the following Wednesday, the 17th, for the few different classes to kind of set up that research meeting that I was telling you guys about before. So I'll put out, or have both me and Dr. G put out a kind of come one, come all, to chat about research, about the process, about setting up design. That's a really, really, really big one. Kind of those types of clarifying conversations. Okay. Awesome. Any last questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Okay. Well, thank you guys very much for your input tonight. I really appreciated the conversation, and I will see you all in a couple weeks. Have a happy Mardi Gras, everybody. Bye.